All right, so I've had you on the channel, John.
Yes.
We had a great conversation it was a couple months ago.
Yep.
We were talking about the Jesus Revolution and Lonnie Frisbee. And then you introduced me to your buddy Ron, who you said is like the Northern California version of Lonnie Frisbee, if you will, in terms of the Jesus Revolution.
That's right.
The movement there. I want to hear about some of the stuff that was happening with the hippies and all that kind of stuff. But I'm more interested and curious in terms of what are the parallels you see between your guys' generation and our generation, and especially the times and the contrast. And what do you think God's doing right now and the juxtaposition of how you guys grew up and how we're growing up?
Well, those are good loaded questions.
Oh, yeah. We're jumping in deep.
You're not messing around here.
I'm going to let Ron take the lead on this because, Ron just celebrated his 75th birthday. I know, and
you're not a young chicken yourself.
All right, young man, you better behave yourself. We're not giving out any prizes for you today. No, Ron is. I would consider him a major leader in the Jesus movement, and he far exceeded me coming into the Jesus movement. So he was already a leader, established leader in the Jesus movement before I got saved. He was the counterpart to Lonnie, who was in Southern California that really helped break that down, out that whole movement there. But, the interesting thing is that Southern California got all the press. Northern California did not get that much press because they're by Hollywood and you got all of these dynamics working. So, Ron, why don't you just share some of your thoughts?
And just before, didn't Lonnie come out of the Northern California as
he did.
well? He was
Actually, he came out of Haight-Ashbury.
Right.
But Ron was even north of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a group called Gospel Outreach, but I'll let Ron share that.
Okay.
Disclaimer, though, John is my PR agent, so he fluffs things up pretty far. But yes, I was born into the Jesus movement. I was saved in 1966 and by a street preacher that was in my neighborhood.
Okay.
God knows why. I was from down in Compton somewhere. And he was, a heroin addict that came and told me the gospel, shared with me about it, said, go home and read your Bible, which I did, and started the New Testament. So I started reading the stories and so on and so forth, and then just went out and tried to start doing them on the streets. So I was kind of caught in that early wind of the Jesus movement. Then I went up to go to school in Northern California in Eureka.
Okay.
And right at that time, there was the essence of the Jesus movement beginning to bubble, where you'd see people kind of with scriptures on their van or something unusual. It was part of that hippie movement thing, lots of that kind of stuff going on.
Yep.
And so went off to jump into that in its very early stages. And we had at least a Coast Guard station up there. And just started inviting people to come, and anybody who was traveling, hitchhiking quite a bit back in those days. So all of a sudden, the place filled up. We had hundreds of people on this land and so forth. And within about 7 years, the thing went worldwide. It exploded out of there. We had little groups in Europe and in South America and all over the place. So it was a very interesting ride to be a part of something that started with a little handful of people that you could fit in this room and have it explode worldwide. I would say to your question is how we would see things today. I think that's the value of the OGs in a way. Those who kind of rode that wave understand the wave a little bit and where there was the downfalls and where there was the shortcomings in our line of thinking and how we approach it. So I would say that's kind of a great contribution to today, because I think today there's a lot of fast-moving stuff and a lot of hot-paced things and so on and so forth. Yeah. And sometimes we don't realize the peculiar things that we accidentally build in as we're moving at pace and not realizing that sometimes we get beyond where God's going.
That's good. That's good. I want to hear more. Tell me more. What are some cautionary tales that you think are like we can glean from that?
Well, I was very lucky in being involved in a ministry that had a guy with a tremendous vision, this guy named Jim Durkin. And although he was alone, and this is one of the built-in problems we had back then, that to every 100 or so young people, there was one old guy.
Hey, you want to see something kind of crazy? Over 75% of the people that watch this channel are not subscribed. Please consider subscribing and turning your bell notification on so that you don't miss anything we have going here.
And so whatever that old guy's penchant was, whatever his thing was, he became the top of the pyramid.
Sure.
And so his personality was built into it. His strengths were what was emphasized, and so on and so forth. And we don't realize that's happening till after the fact. And then after the fact, you realize you've created something that has cloned itself accidentally and kind of lost the beauty of the individual DNA that's so wonderful. As I was traveling around the country, I would come to a little town and realize that the DNA in that town was a little 10 people or something like that. They were doing something, but they had this wonderful thing going on. And we travel from place to place, and we'd see people saved, and we'd go to a local river, and we'd drop them in the river, and we'd travel on, and so on and so forth. But I got to see all these distinct groups with wonderful aspects of who God was. And yet the kind of nature of how we do things in the Lord sometimes, or our ways, or at least our patterns, are to consolidate things together and congeal those things together and not necessarily appreciate and enjoy the beauty of the individual parts. And I think that was something that we kind of outpaced and outran, and we put things further and further out there. We taught language and had evangelistic teams, and we went into these other countries, but we got thinner and thinner, and the little threads that held us together were thinner. And because there were only a few older ones to look to, those relationships got further and further away from each other. And so people were kind of stranded almost at the end of the day on those kinds of things. And only those who decided, we did end up with one of the components of the group kind of creating its own denomination, so to speak, down in Central and South America. They went on to do it, but it was much more in that structured church style thing, So I think that as we look back, some of the things we can get from those experiences was the cultural change that you guys are now having yourselves. Our cultural change was this kind of creative, artsy, vagabondy kind of thing, which was very cool. But then the problem is you try and get people saved, and then you put them in your box, and they all kind of fall in line, and everybody's kind of similar, and that streamlines things as far as being able to get things done. But on the other hand, it takes that essence. I often think about Jesus and healing. He heals one when the shadow's walking by. Another one he's healing from afar, saying, the child is healed. Another one he waits the person to die, then brings him back. Another one they put mud in the person's eyes. Another, you try and figure out, why didn't Jesus do it the same way like we do? We always have it on Sunday night at 7:00, and you do it this way.
Sure. Sure.
Jesus didn't look at things that way, and I felt like that was part of the beauty of the hippie movement, is people were kind of thinking of things outside the box. And so in the very earliest, most pure and pristine moments of the Jesus movement, that was what was going on. Once we figured out how to box it in, we started, building the fences between ourselves and other groups that maybe thought slightly differently, and so on. So we did all those human things that kind of jump in, because it's very difficult to maintain that kind of Christ-like spontaneity to some degree.
Yeah.
So, I think that's a cautionary tale. The beauty of it is guys like ourselves can come back.
Yeah.
John and I have been together for how long?
24 years. Been hanging.
And trying to solve those things. John is completely different than I am.
Yeah.
And that is the beauty of the relationship.
Yeah.
Rather than, oh man, that's exhausting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
unity as brothers and believers doesn't have to be uniformity.
Yeah, exactly.
It sounds like you're kind of talking about people kind of naturally, this cult of personality starting with the leader of something, and then everyone starts conforming to be like a person instead of saying, how can we be uniquely like Jesus?
Yes.
Yeah.
And you can see that by basically saying, do you know what's going to happen at that building this next week? And if you already know what's going to happen, and the sequence which it's going to happen, and the time for each of those things to happen, and you realize, wow, that is completely predictable, then where is any of the spontaneity left? And when the spontaneity leaves, then we oftentimes are left with, to some degree, a business.
Getting back to your point of times and the seasons that we're in right now, how did it relate to the times and seasons in our youth? Well, there was a big, and I think I shared this on the last podcast I was with you, but there was a big drop-off with our generation and our parents' generation because of drugs, sex, and rock and roll.
Yeah,
I mean, that changed everything.
Yep.
Specifically the drugs, because now we were young people exploring that realm, and we were doing not just smoking weed, but we were doing a lot of hallucinogenics and things like that. So that was taking you into another spiritual dimension illegally, but nonetheless out there. And so you're experiencing these things, and you're just going, I know that there's a supernatural realm out there, you know? And so it started to kind of like expand your mind a little bit. And all of a sudden you questioned everything, every institution, everybody, and who was, we had a famous saying that said, don't trust anybody over 30, you know, until you got to 30.
Yeah.
It changed. But, you know, it was really quite the mantra for us at that time, because it was such a radical shift. People don't realize, you know, JFK got assassinated, Martin Luther King got assassinated, Robert Kennedy got assassinated. You had race riots. You had all kinds of upheaval happening. Music, heavy influence. Again, you know, I think I shared this before, but, you know, we went from Leave It to Beaver to Jimi Hendrix. That's a big jump right there, man. There was just, you know, big, huge spaces between our parents and who we were. Well, we're starting to see that again here because of the cultural changes that are happening and what the mandates that they're putting out there. And, you know, this month we're celebrating a certain group of people that a lot of people don't, you know, say, I'm not necessarily wanting to celebrate that. Well, now you'll be called certain names if you don't celebrate these things, you know? And so there's big changes culturally, and as there were in those times periods, very big, dramatic cultural changes, big cultural changes right now, like we've never seen before. But boy, it sure looks awfully familiar, doesn't it, Ron?
Yeah, it does.
You know, for how we are seeing how the Spirit of God is beginning to move. And I would put it on the category of that Isaiah 60, verse 1 and 2. Arise and shine, for the light has come. The glory of the Lord is about ready to come upon you. But great darkness also is coming.
Yeah.
But the Lord will prevail, you know?
Yeah.
Hey, this is a segment from our daily after party stream. Consider partnering with us online for as little as $5 a month to get access to these daily after party streams completely unedited. You'll also get access to our podcast as they are streamed live into the community before anyone else gets to see them, get to interact with our guests, get access to our private Discord server, and a discount code for our store for as little as $5 a month. Ultimately, that will help towards helping us continue contextualizing the gospel using media and podcast here on YouTube. All right, I'll see you over there. Peace.